Thank you so much. Thank you.
And how are you, Patrick? Namaskaram. Lovely to see you.
Very good to see you. I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm also well, and well by the grace of the divine and Lord Arunachalam.
Deo gracias.
So I think you are missing the Arunachalam here, no?
Yes, but as we know, Arunachala is everywhere, right?
And how is Doha? How is the situation?
It's like everywhere else, more or less, but it's getting better, but it's still half lockdown, let's call it. And how is it in Chennai?
In Chennai, there is lockdown, and today there is extension of lockdown for one more week. And the vegetables would not be available. So today everybody is bringing vegetable as you buy for the temple.
Do you have your own garden?
No.
Oh.
So we have to connect to the cosmic garden to get some.
Yes.
So
thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for to the Circle for Creative Co-Learning, the beautiful work of the circle, CCC, and also Neemrana University.
Raffles University.
And I think it's Neemrana is in
Rajasthan.
The city is in Rajasthan, right?
Yes.
Right. I may have actually, I don't think I visited Neemrana, but I visited Jaipur, which is not far.
Yes.
It was a long time ago, I think 10 years ago. I traveled through Gujarat and Rajasthan for about 10 days.
That's good. That's good.
And
so
we have, yes. And we have our dear friend Nina from Siberia. And
hello.
So Nina, maybe you would like to greet our dear friend Patrick. You are living by Baikal and Patrick is living with the sea and the desert.
Extremes meet.
Nina, you can kindly unmute yourself.
Yes. Not only mute, but I just decorated so that you can see at least my face. I'm really happy to greet Patrick and you, Ananta, and everybody. To see your radiant faces and your souls. It's so nice. Do you hear me well? Is it good?
Yes.
Very well, very well.
Thank you. So I am happy to feel all of you.
Yes.
By the way, the name that appears on my screen is my wife's name.
Really?
That's why you might be a bit confused. Yes, that's.
Is she Russian? I am Russian. I'm from Russia.
Yes. I saw your name in Russian earlier.
Yes. That's why
Nina,
I just changed it.
Goncharova. No, she's a Chinese. Ethnically, she's Chinese, but she's American and Malaysian of origin, actually, Malaysian Chinese.
I see. It's nice.
Yes. So shall we start the session?
Yes.
Following the tradition, we will listen the mantra of Buddham Saranam Gacchami, and then we'll start the session.
We also, I wish to say, we have Swati. I have requested her to sing a, hymn Lord Shiva. I think she's around. You can kindly check. Her name is Swati Suresh.
Okay.
Yes, sir, I'm here. Yes.
welcome Swati. First we'll hear Buddham Saranam Gacchami, then Swati. And I
Yes.
also want to take this opportunity to welcome all friends. I see Professor Devi Prasanna Patnaik, a great soul
Welcome,
of
sir.
our world. And Patrick, Professor Devi Prasanna Patnaik is a great soul and a great thinker and linguist of the world. And we are very grateful that he is with us. And also other friends like Gyan Luigi. We welcome all of you. Now to Randhir, please.
Yes. So
Saranam Gacchami Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Sangham Saranam Gacchami Buddham Saranam Gacchami Dhammam Saranam Gacchami Sangham Saranam Gacchami Buddham Saranam Gacchami Dhammam Saranam Gacchami
So, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Namaste, everybody. Greetings. I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, on behalf of School of Humanities and Social Sciences of Raffles University, Swadhyaya Sahachkara Circle for Creative Co-Learning, Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, Puducherry and Chennai, Rage Global Foundation USA. Welcome to this international dialogue, which topic is Key to Beyond. It's a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have available to us one of the great authorities of perennial philosophy, distinguished speaker, Professor Patrick Laude. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our Chief Patron, Honorable Justice Meena Digombar, former Chief Justice of Rajasthan High Court, Vice Chancellor of Raffles University, Diwakar Kohli, Deepika Dave, Chief of Rage Global Foundation USA, and Professor Ananta Giri, Professor at Madras Institute of Development Studies and Honorary Executive Trustee of Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, and all the respected participants and students. Let me give a brief introduction to our honorable speaker, Dr. Patrick Laude. He is a professor of highly respected professor of religious studies at Georgetown University, Qatar branch. He is a former fellow of École Normale Suprême in Paris. He earned a master's degree in philosophy from University of Paris and a doctorate in French literature from Indiana University. His scholarly interests include comparative mysticism and metaphysics, poetry and metaphysics, and Western representations of Asian spiritual traditions and interpretations of Islamic and Asian contemplative, mythical and wisdom traditions. He has extensively written and lectured on eminent and original figures of European spirituality and authored over many books and monographs. Some of them are like Shimmering Mirrors, Reality and Appearance in Contemplative Metaphysics, East and West, Pathway to Inner Islam, Indiana world wisdom, divine play, sacred laughter, and a spiritual understanding. And today we are going to talk on the very book of his, Keys to Beyond, 5th of Sean, Cross Transnational Language and Transcendence, and his latest book, which is forthcoming. Very famous Indian religious guru, Rama Maharshi's message of the present. Dr. Laude has been teaching at Georgetown since 1991 as professor of French and theology. Since August 2006, he has been on the faculty of foreign service in Qatar, where he teaches theology and humanities courses. We are so grateful, and we are very, very grateful that he accepted our invitation. I also want to give a brief introduction to our Swadhyaya Sahachkara, co-learning circle of self and mutual studies. Swadhyaya Sahachkara is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, societies, and the world. Friends associated with this are eager to work and mediate with the new horizons of thinking and new movements of social and cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as great Sir Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chittaranjan Das, a seeker and creative thinker from Odisha, and many others from around the world. We also present our writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite seekers from different fields of life to share with us their lives, vision, sadhana, and struggle of creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogues. We meet every Sunday and sometimes Wednesday. We are now nurturing this in collaboration with Department of Humanities and Social Sciences of Raffles University, Neemrana, and Raise Global Foundation, USA. Now I would like to invite respected Professor Anant Kumar Giri sir to kindly moderate the session. Sir, over to you. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, dear Randhir, and a warm welcome, a hearty welcome again to our dear friend Patrick, Professor Patrick Laude, whom I met many years ago, around 2017, and then we had the blessings to meet with each other in his university, in his place in Doha, which was a beautiful experience. And Patrick has been a very deep seeker, and as his work embodies, and it is a very rare coming together, rare confluence of deep inquiry as well as a spiritual journey. And this book also reflects this, Keys to the Beyond. And I just wish to share a few quick thoughts as an invitation to our dialogue. And if I, before that, let me not forget, first listen to the hymn that would be rendered to us by Swati. So let us first listen to this hymn, and then I would share some thoughts. In the meantime, if you enable me to share the screen. And
yes, sir, you can share.
Okay. So now let us first listen to Swati, please.
Thank you, sir. Audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes. Thank you. Voice on voice I am poor. Shambho Swayambho Shiva Shambho Swayambho Shambho Shiva Shambho Swayambho Shambho Shiva Shambho Nirguna Parabhupa Gama Prabhancharahita Brahma Swarupa Gama Bhota Nija Guna Nihita Nihita Nija Guna Nihita Ananta Ananda Akshaya Linga Shiva Shambho Swayambho Rimi Rimi Khita Khita Tho Rimi 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 Khita Khita Thari Khita Khita Tho Matanka Guna Sarvanesha Matangasha Sarvadikambara Vestita Nitya Natesha Isha Sadhesha Shiva Shambho Swayambho. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you so much. And our dear friend Patrick is a great lover and worker with Arunachala. It is in that spirit I thought a hymn to Lord Shiva. So it will be a humble connection between Arunachal, who is present everywhere, and us and Patrick. So now I would quickly share the screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ananta. Thank you, Dr. Giri.
And if it is all right, I'll just pick a few lines as a prelude.
Yes, please.
And so it is a joy to join Patrick in learning with him uh, with his book, Keys to the Beyond. And here I wish to present this line from his book. What is needed in our time is to provide people with keys fashioned afresh. And can I see the whole screen, please, Randhir? Now, at the moment, it is clouded by the photos, Okay, let me do my best. What is needed is to provide people with keys fashioned afresh. And then the whole journey with perennial philosophy and perennial writing. And then, out of many things that he discusses the book, for example, there is a chapter on the Buddhist notion of upaya, which most often is translated as skillful means. This notion is central in Fridtjofsson's opus as it suggests ways in which the relative or intrinsically relative can provide ways of access to the absolute within religious traditions. So another very important insights of Patrick is to build on each one of our tradition and explore its cross-traditional and universal significance, as for example, the notion of upaya. And then building on that, he's also writing, these means are provisional in the sense that they do not and cannot convey the ultimate truth, being only formal ways to orient individual according to their qualifications. So again, this whole notion of upaya, relative and the absolute. Now to understand this very, uh, uh, I get a message from Maruf. Is there some problem? 1 minute. Maruf is a very deep scholar of the field, Patrick, and he has also
Sir,
written on.
sir, good evening.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Some of my friends were also interested in joining the meeting. Could you allow them on the Zoom platform? Just they wanted to listen to the proceedings.
Yes,
our
I will admit everyone.
Yeah. So I have just requested. Maybe you just you are you asking the host to allow them. That is all.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
As we are with Patrick.
There are many great bucks of Patrick Laude here. We know him. He had invited once in for a talk here in one of our university in the Zoom in that online form. So we know we have read some of his writings. Hamara salam unko bataiye. Yes.
Okay.
So there are many friends who are interested in listening to him. Yeah.
Okay.
So as we welcome Patrick, the very idea of the key, I thought I can present you a small poem, and the poem goes like this. It begins with the German word for keys called Schlüssel. You, yes, I am the key of your beginning. You showed me the way, introduced me to the headmaster of the school. We met. He introduced me to a sister from my country, Devjani, a sister of light, daughter Dunia, light of the world in our eyes, and husband Hanar spends life with smiles, singing and teaching mathematics. You became my key. So therefore, how the whole idea of the key, that how keys to the beyond also involves keys of being to each other. And there is, as there is a lot of reference to metaphysics and transcendence in Patrick's work, with very deep ways of thinking and being. And especially, I was very struck in Patrick's introduction, where he says that reading a text is not only follow one path of recur, that is hermeneutics of suspicion, but what he calls as hermeneutics of recollection, and to recollect that memory. And he also makes very deep reflection on symbol, and how symbol is a different kind of reference, and how it has an infinite meaning as well as signified. And that sense of infinity vis-a-vis symbol points to also many ways of symbolization, and that how each one of us, we also can be a symbol. Our path also can be a path of symbolization. It is in that spirit I also want to quickly present a poem called Practical Metaphysics. Let me see. Just very quickly. Okay, this one maybe very quickly. It is called Practical Metaphysics. Practical metaphysics. Why be afraid of metaphysical? Because this engagement with layers of the metaphysical, which to some extent goes against the taken for granted liberation that we have to question metaphysical all the time, what is called the post-metaphysical movement, varieties of ways. And everybody celebrates the questioning of the metaphysical, starting from Martin Heidegger in his own way to Jürgen Habermas. But why be afraid of metaphysical? Why such antipathy to universal? Metaphysics is not just an idea. It is not simply conceptual. Again, in his work, Patrick invites us to understand that symbol is not just conceptual, different kind of, even the kind of literalism that has, there is a distinction between different kind of literalism. And nor is it only an ideal, it is experiential. It begins with our experience, takes us to further heights and depths, being and being, being of being non-being, and to our nurturing threads, connecting to both the unique and the universal. Practical metaphysics, practical universality. We become a Bodhi tree. Roots of it points to and comes from the sky. Bodhi tree and the upwardly rooted Aswastha meet in our lives. We become the two birds dancing with these trees, one witnessing, one eating. We also become the third, bird and bird, flying and singing, a new root of the metaphysical. Husserl and Sri Aurobindo, Tagore and Kumaraswamy, Lush Irigare and Mata Amritanandamayi Devi dance together in our song of a new humanity. So with this, it is a joy for me and us to welcome Patrick, Professor Patrick Laude, and we look forward to learning with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ananta, Dr. Giri. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to the RACE Global Foundation and to the Circle for creative co-learning, for this generous invitation. It's an honor to speak with you today. And I'm going to try to keep the format as informal as possible. I don't intend to develop a lecture for very long. I'd rather have exchange with you in the form of questions and enrichment and perhaps even objections. So I will start. I have been asked to speak about the gist, so to speak, of this book, which is entitled Keys to the Beyond, Fridtjof Schuon, Cross-Traditional Language of Transcendence, which is also translated in French, my native language. It's also available in French in my native language, under a slightly different title. And I'd like to start, as Ananta did, with the concept of keys, and of course keys to the beyond, and the question of metaphysics, which was also alluded to by Dr. Giri. So keys. Keys in the sense here that keys open doors, and therefore allows us to move forward, to move beyond the door, so to speak. And so there's an aspect of opening. There's a technical aspect, because a key is a particular object that is fitted to open a door. But beyond the technical aspect, beyond the formal aspect, there is a sense of opening, a sense of wayfaring beyond boundaries, so to speak, or beyond the threshold, let's say, of the door. And so the idea is that the concept, the ideas that are used by Fridtjof Schuon, the great perennialist philosopher, in his works, are like keys. But they are keys to the beyond. And the beyond means that the keys must not be taken literally, but rather symbolically. And the notion of symbol here is crucial, of course, because a symbol, as you know, has two faces. It has a formal face, which is what we see, which is what we hear, but it has also, beyond the formal face, there is the unfathomable, infinite wealth of meaning, which is intangible, invisible. And so in that sense, concepts in Xuan's view, and I think in the perennialist view in general, are not to be taken as literal notions, but as keys to realities and to a reality that lies beyond any formal crystallizations, whether in the form of concepts or images or others. Now, the subtitle of the book, and the subtitle of the book is Fridtjof Schuon, Cross-Traditional Language of Transcendence. So I need to say a few words, of course, about Fridtjof Schuon. Some of you may not be familiar with his work. He is considered to be one of the most important, if not the most important, so-called perennialist thinkers of our times. He was born in 1907 and he died in 1998 at the age of 91. It is difficult to summarize the works of Schuon, but one may say simply that it is primarily founded on metaphysics in the traditional sense of non-dual or non-dualistic metaphysics. And here, the very concept of metaphysics raises questions here, as Ananta suggested earlier. That is, in metaphysica in Greek, we have the idea of beyond the physical or beyond physical things. So curiously, in the very Greek concept, or etymologically at least, in the Greek etymology of the term metaphysics, we have a kind of duality. We have a duality between ta physica, the physical, and that which is beyond the physical. Whereas, of course, is what we call, let's say, Advaita Vedanta in the Indian tradition, in the Hindu tradition. We have a Vedanta, we have a commentary, we have an understanding of the Veda, which is Advaita, which is non-dual, which is non-dualistic. And you find, of course, other forms of non-dualistic or non-dual metaphysics in other traditions, like, let's say, in different ways in Madhyamaka Buddhism, or in the Sufi school of Wahdat al-Wujud, that is the unity of the essence or existence, depending on how one wants to translate Wujud. But at any rate, in all of these schools, metaphysics is intrinsically non-dual, which means simply that it teaches that reality is one, essentially. That the multiplicity of phenomena and realities that we experience is only an appearance of reality, that it is not the ultimate essence of things, and that this ultimate essence is one. And because it is one, or in as much as it is one, it is everything, because there cannot be a second by the one. The one is the one, not only in the numerical sense, as opposed to 2 or 3 or 1,000, but in the metaphysical sense of being the one and only. So here, the first chapter of the book is precisely devoted to non-duality from the point of view of Advaita Vedanta, because Schuon considered in his works that Advaita Vedanta provides the most direct language for non-duality. Of course, there are many other expressions of non-duality, as I mentioned just a few. You could also mention, let's say, Taoism. But he considered that, Schuon considered that Advaita has something more direct about it, in the sense that it is not tied up, so to speak, with, or it is less tied up, or it is not tied up perhaps at all, or only laterally rather, tied up with religious language. It is part of a religious tradition, of course, but at the same time, it is in its essence independent from any religious quote-unquote mythology. And its dialectics is very direct. The dialectics of the Shankara is complex, but it is also very direct, very focused on the one thing, which is the Atman, the one reality, the Brahman, the Atman. And from Schuon's point of view, Advaita Vedanta has also the advantage, so to speak, of being founded on a kind of bedrock discrimination between the Brahman or the Nirguna Brahman and Maya, the realm of appearance. And in this sense, it is the best possible expression of what is at stake in metaphysics. That is, the distinction between that which is fully real, truly real, and that which is not. Now, then some other chapters of the book are devoted to key concepts that Xuan borrows from various traditions. For example, Upaya was mentioned from the Buddhist tradition, Maya, of course, from Advaita Vedanta, the notion of avatar from the Hindu tradition, the concept of Trinity from Christianity, the concept of Wahdat al-Wujud, unicity of being, which I mentioned earlier, but also the concept of the principle of yin-yang, the yin-yang from the Chinese traditions. So Xuan in his work makes use of all of these concepts that he borrows from various traditions, but he tends to give to them a meaning that is more universal than the one they hold in their respective traditions. And that, of course, raises potentially a problem, or at least a question, for faithful and practitioners of these various traditions on the one hand, and also for academic scholars on the other hand, because the objection might be, well, isn't it a betrayal of, let's say, the concept of yin-yang or the concept of Maya to use it in ways that, so to speak, transcends the specific confines and the specific meaning that they have in their respective tradition? Well, from the point of view of Xuan, of course, there is a sense in which these concepts have a certain integrity within the tradition, but in as much as they are keys precisely, they also have a kind of universal horizon that transcends the particular limitations of their own traditional definitions. For example, the concept of Maya has a specific meaning in the works of Shankara. All right, Maya basically is everything that is not the Brahman or the Nirguna Brahman, and therefore it spans, so it stems from the blade of grass to the god Brahma. All right, this is the domain of relativity. But in Shankara, by and large, Maya is conceived as a superimposition upon Atman, and therefore Shankara is not particularly interested in, how should I say, differentiating between different degrees of Maya. Maya is just appearance, it's illusion, it's superimposition. So Maya has to be dispelled, right, as a whole. Well, Xuan approaches the matter of Maya a bit differently. He starts from Shankara, but he also likes to emphasize the fact that within appearance itself, within illusion itself, there are degrees of reality. Not every Maya is equal, so to speak, but there's a higher Maya and a lower Maya, as it were. And that within Maya, you have realities that, even though they do belong to Maya, point to Atman in a more direct manner. And that is a significant inflection, a significant shift from the purely Shankarian point of view, if you wish. Now, I could take other examples about yin-yang, about the way Xuan uses also the concept of upaya. I will say a few words about this one because I think it's important. Upaya, as was reminded earlier, is most often translated by skillful means in English. And it's a Buddhist concept, of course, that refers to teachings. Teachings that are appropriate for the particular needs of particular people, whether individually or collectively. So in that sense, the whole spectrum of Buddhist schools and teachings is nothing else than a range of upayas, right? And that's why arguably you have such a diversity within the Buddhist Dharma. Now, Xiong takes up this concept of skillful means, and he extends it beyond Buddhism and beyond teachings as such to religions. Religions, he understands religions in general to be upayas, to be skillful means, which is very interesting and very precious, because if you understand a religion as a skillful means, well, you understand, first of all, that it's skillful. That means that it works. And religion works because it has a reality that is transcendent. It is backed, so to speak, by transcendence, and therefore it has an effectiveness. The concept of grace that is to be found in various traditions with different inflections, whether it's kripa, whether it's rahma in Islam, whether it's divine grace in gracia in Latin in the Roman Catholic Church, all of this concept of grace, which have differences, but they all refer to a sort of effectiveness of the transcendent, ways in which the transcendent makes it possible for things to be known and realized from beyond the human, as it were, right? So basically, skillful means that religion work. If it is to be a real religion, it has to work. That is, it has to be able to produce a transformation of human beings. It has to be able to allow them to assimilate the principles, the metaphysical principles, and ultimately, it has to be able to make them closer to the ultimate, and perhaps even to be one with the ultimate, right? So that's the effective aspect of upaya as skillful means. But in the translation of upaya, there is also, and in the very term in Sanskrit, there is also the idea of means. And a means is not the end. Upaya is not upeya, right? So if the means is not the end, then it must not be confused with the end. Interesting, because then it means that religion is not absolute. It conveys the absolute, it shows the way of the absolute, it provides the means to reach the absolute, but it's not the absolute. So if you turn religion as a formal system into the absolute, then you are in trouble. Then you open the way to extreme formalization, extreme formalism rather, and fanaticism, and everything that comes in its wake, right? So to think of religion as upaya in that sense is very, very precious. On the one hand, the last one, not to let go of the transcendent aspect of religion, the integrity of tradition, but on the other hand, it also prevents one from falling into the pitfalls of a kind of absolutization of religious forms. At any rate, the last thing I'd like to say as a kind of very, very broad introduction to this book is that the subtitle goes Fridtjof Xiong's Cross-Traditional Language of Transcendence. And the term cross-traditional language of transcendence, must be explained briefly also. Cross-traditional for Xiong doesn't mean, in fact, it doesn't use the term cross-traditional. I sort of used it in my title, but as far as I remember, I don't think he used this adjective cross-traditional anyway. But cross-traditional here means simply, it doesn't mean that traditions are lumped together in a kind of syncretistic blend, so to speak, like a kind of medley, a kind of religious medley. In other words, in Xiong's works, as in all of the perennialist works, there's a sense of integrity of each of the tradition, right? So cross-traditional means, however, that these various traditions, these various integral traditions, have also points of intersections. And of course, the main point of intersection, obviously, is the ultimate point of intersection, which is the truth of non-duality, which is the ultimate message. of, if not the religions themselves, at least the deepest forms of mysticism that you find therein. And finally, language of transcendence is also a very important expression because it implies that there is a duality to language, and there is a duality to metaphysical language. And this duality has to do with the fact that for Xuan, metaphysics is a means of access to reality, but it is not reality. So there is a sense in which every metaphysical system or every metaphysical expression is both effective and also at the same time relative and, in a sense, approximative, and of course limited, and therefore must never be taken in a formalistic, overly dogmatic manner. And here one may remember, as a kind of conclusion, the famous Zen saying that this has been quoted many times, but which is always important to remember: a finger point to the moon, but the finger is not the moon, right? Beware of not confusing the finger for the moon. So this is one of the key lessons, so to speak, to be found in the metaphysical exposition of Fridtjof Schuon. So I think I'll stop here, and I'll be very glad to exchange with you on anything that is related to what I said, or anything else that is related to Schuon's works, or perennialism, or metaphysics, or non-duality.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for so simply and elegantly holding our hand and taking us in this journey. So to initiate conversation, I request my dear friend, who himself is also a very deep seeker and scholar, Dr. Muhammad Maruf Saha from Kashmir, the land of the perennial. And I request Maruf to share for 5 minutes or so, and then other friends. 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anantaji, for organizing and inviting Professor Patrick Laude. We have been in a way familiar with him, his works. So it has been a very timely discussion. We wanted to ask or reflect on 2 points. Why is
Now,
why is it?
Excuse me, Maruf bhai.
Okay. I am starting my video as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So we see the living Sufi.
Now you are able to see me? Yeah.
Only a little, okay. Not yet.
What is... I'm not able to, I don't think what has happened to it. I will still try to.
It's okay. Back camera is on. You can open front camera.
Front camera, yeah. No,
yes.
Yes. I was wondering why has been mainstream philosophy of religion and mainstream philosophy in a way still resistant to Schuon. He's almost in a way boycotted. You would not find in any major philosophy of religion anthology references to him, or anthologies devoted to, in a way, or his work being anthologized. Second point, why do not we find in perennialist deeper engagement or sustained engagement with likes of Heidegger? For example, Heidegger, I think from a different quarter, if we can see, he's an ally. For example, Corban and others have tried to show that the questioning of his metaphysics, that's a conceptual metaphysics which he is questioning. So the metaphysics which is central to the perennialist is in a way differently invoked or evoked in the mainstream postmodern thinkers as well. But somehow there comes there remains a suspicion that the postmodernists are against perennialists. This is a general orthodoxy now. My point is, why is not there a single book devoted to a study of Heidegger from a perennialist point of view, for example? Since Heidegger has also written so much on poetry, and poetry as a pathway to the absolute, in a way, Patrick Laude, I think, he has been very much interested in this topic, has written extensively on it. But somehow Heidegger and the others who have followed him, they are not, in a way, being engaged by mainstream perennialists. So we find, in a way, isolation of these major perennialist thinkers. They are major contemporary philosophers are not engaging with them. Is it because they have not been, in a way, trying to engage with them in turn, or there remains some serious differences that we are not able to have a dialogue between, for example, Derrida and Schwann, Derrida and this other major traditionalists. I remember Nasser, he dismisses Heidegger very sharply in a very small paragraph. Schwann devotes a very small space to him, but mostly critical. He thinks his metaphysics is very subjective, based on anxiety and all that. But I think the very sustained engagement with Heideggerian corpus is not there, and it has ultimately helped to not bridge the gap between the mainstream philosophers of religion, mysticism, and perennialists. It has helped to widen the difference. Is there a way to engage between the two? That I was trying to ask.
And along with that, dear Maruf Bhai, and in Patrick's books also, there is a chapter on Sufism. And Christoph Sohn himself has written on Islam. So would you kindly bring a little bit of perspective from Ibn Arabi and the Sufis and that past dialogue as a way of dialogue with Patrick?
Yeah, my point is, for example, let us bring Ibn Arabi. We know there are some studies on Ibn Arabi and Derrida. Ian Almond published it. Ibn Arabi has been of interest to major postmodern thinkers. So there has been engagement with major Sufi thinkers who are at the center of perennialist understanding of the world. So if we have been able to engage with Ibn Arabi, with Mansur al-Hallaj, we know Derrida has had a very positive view about Mansur al-Hallaj. So the major Sufi thinkers who have, in a way, tried to present a more poetic approach to metaphysics, non-conceptual metaphysics, what Heidegger calls meditative thinking. But I think that has not been then brought into the mainstream philosophy or continental philosophy in that big way. We know Schwann wrote beautiful poetry at the end of his career that has not been much studied. Kathleen Ryan and others have been also, in a way, exploring this poetic path to the absolute, which is in a way more, in a way we can say, postmodern mind is more open to that. Somehow there is a deep suspicion of conceptual schemes and all those, in a way, previous systems where we think as if some abstractions are being imposed. And secondly, there has been a dialogue between Sufism and existentialism. But again, mainstream perennialists have been very critical of existentialist thinkers. You know, a letter on Kierkegaard by Schwann is very critical. And I don't think then other Jaspers and other Bugby and other existentialists, I think there are more spaces to engage with them from a Sufi or a perennialist point of view. So I would love if Patrick elaborates on this, how he sees my point.
Yes, thank you very much for these questions. Well, first of all, with respect to the first question, that is the fact that Fridtjof Schwann is rarely, if at all, is absent basically from philosophy of religion, or very marginal at least. I think it has to do with a number of factors. The first one is that he was himself a self-taught scholar. You know, he was not an academic scholar. He didn't go to the university, in fact. So all of his work is the reflection, of course, of reading, but also intellectual and spiritual maturation and meditation. It is not an academic work in the ordinary sense of the term, at least. And he doesn't, for example, Schwann does not, for example, reference very specifically this or that passage and so on and so forth. So his language already, the modality of his expression is foreign to the academic world. So there's already this problem. Of course, that's not the only problem. I don't think that's the main problem, but that's a problem. But the main problem, I think, has to do with the fact that he has a totally different intent. The intent in academia, by and large, is to have a better, deeper, more informed understanding of text, ideas, concepts, trends, and so forth, and to exchange and to develop exchanges that foster this better, wider, deeper understanding. That was not the intent of Xuan. Xuan was agnostic in the etymological sense of the term, and a spiritual master, and therefore a spiritual guide, and therefore his intent was really to open the intelligence and the sensibility of his readers to the spiritual path, ultimately. In fact, he wrote that he would be profoundly satisfied if the only result of his writings, books, was or is to have brought back a number of people to prayer. You know, it's very minimalistic as an objective, to bring back some people to prayer. So it's not an academic intent, obviously. So there is already a profound difference in what is at stake in the two modes of expression, in the two works. Now, with respect to Heidegger, first of all, I must confess that I don't know Heidegger very well. I think there are different Heideggers. I imagine that, Professor Shah, you are referring most likely to the later Heidegger, to the poetical Heidegger, to the meditations on Hölderlin, and even the Heidegger who discovered Zen also, and also his Meister Eckhart. So I think that with this Heidegger, there are obviously points of junction. There are probably convergences with mysticism at large, and non-dualism also, probably. I think that the letter on humanism is probably one of the most important texts in this respect, if one wanted to engage with Heidegger. For example, when he writes, if I recall correctly, being is the transcendent, pure and simple. I don't know German, so I couldn't quote it in German, but basically I remember the translation, it was that. So there's obviously here a mystical, non-dualistic Heidegger, or at least a sense of the presence, a cultivation of the presence with a big P, which is akin to the highest reaches of mysticism. But at the same time, the language, the idiom of Heidegger is complex and is difficult of access to many people. So it may also be that there is here some kind of difficulty having to do with formal expression itself. Now, with respect to your last question, was more about postmodernity at large. Well, I think that here there is really, I mean, of course, you can always have postmodern thinkers dialogue with traditionalist writers, but here there's a fundamental difference, I think. And personally, I've written about the matter actually to try to show that I don't believe in this kind of rapprochement. I mean, there's always the possibilities of correlations and contrasts and so forth, but I think it's deeply different. It's deeply different. And the difference, I think, has to do with presence, precisely. That is, Perennialist view, any conceptual formalization is not an end in itself. It is with a view to opening oneself to presence. That is, to a dimension that has to do with being and not simply with thinking. And that's the gist of all the great traditions. I mean, you mentioned Ibn Arabi, one could mention Shankara and others. It's always about being. It's not about thinking. Of course, Heidegger thinking being, but there's a mode of thinking which is thinking being, of course. But you see what I mean? It's not about the conceptual as such. postmodernity, in a sense, rejects both presence or being and thinking also in a certain way, because there is this sort of we are always at a distance from that which is thought, which could be an interesting and which is an interesting intuition, which to some extent could provide avenues of dialogue with mysticism. And my colleague and good friend Ian Almond, who you mentioned a minute ago, actually did an interesting work in this respect with Ibn Arabi and Derrida. But I think ultimately, and I've talked with him about this actually, it would himself agree that this is a nice exercise in terms of cross-traditional East-West kind of dialogue. But at bottom, Ibn Arabi and Derrida are profoundly different paths, profoundly different ways of experiencing reality and thinking about it. So maybe I will disappoint you in being a bit exclusive, but I think here we have to recognize when things are different. That doesn't mean that one cannot exchange, but they are profoundly different, I think. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Maro. And one request to Patrick and all friends, that we have some sustained participants in our learning journey from Odisha, where we planted our seeds, and it helps to translate a little bit. So I seek your kindness that I would translate whatever has been spoken into 5 minutes quickly, and then into Odia, and then we would resume our conversation. And I'm very happy that many friends are co-present. Among our inspiring co-participant is Professor Ori Soltes.
Oh, yes.
And who was the key, Patrick was the kind key to connect me to Ori, and he joined us some weeks ago, and he's coming again after 2 weeks to help us in understanding Martin Buber. And we also have another dear friend, David Bartos, and he can speak to you in German and also in Chinese. So I would, after my translation, I would request Ori, David, and then our dear friend Nina from Siberia to share their thoughts, and then we'll open up the conversation. In the meantime, I request all friends to please put in the chat box your questions and thoughts, and I request Randhir to kindly take a note and help me and to move ahead with the discussion. So now, very brief translation of what we have spoken in Odia. Amar bhai bhauni mane au amar Patrick aji कहउचंती तांकर गोटे बही अछि keys to beyond, अर्थात आमर जो वास्तवतार ऊर्ध्व को जीवा पाई एक चाबी, एटाकू से बुझाउचंती आमर जो एक बहुत बड़ दार्शनिक फ्रिज ऑफ स्वान, मु आपण मानकू तांकर पैट्रिंकर चैप्टर गोटे चैप्टर पठेइची, से फ्रिज स्वान कर बही रे से बहुत कथा आलोचना करूचंती। उदाहरण स्वरूप आमे माने जानिथिबा जे अद्वैत वेदांत एवं शंकर शंकर जो कथा कहले एटा माया, आम भितर आम श्री अरविंद को भी पढ़िथिबा, आबे भी आम माने जानिथिबे जे वर्तमान आम दिन सबुदिन सकाळे लाइव डिवाइन पढुचु, तेणु श्री अरविंद भी माया एवं आ विषय गभीर कथा कहिसंती। आउ पैट्रिक एटी फ्रिज ऑफ स्वान कर भारी महत्वपूर्ण कथाटी कहउचंती जे माया अनेक प्रकारर माया, केते प्रकार माया अछि जोटा कि प्रकृत रे आम ब्रह्म को पाख को नहीं जाए, गोटे प्रकार उच्चतर माया एवं निम्नतर माया, एवं एटा गोटे भारी गभीर कथाटी जोटा कि आमको बुझिबा को पड़िबो। एहा सहित आ गोटे कथा से आलोचना कले बुद्ध चिंतन एवं बुद्धंकर पथरु, सेटा होची उपाय। जो उपायटा होची गोटे प्रकार बाट, गोटे मीन्स, गोटे माध्यम, स्किलफुल, माने आमे ताकू भारी स्किलफुली अनेक कौशलतार सहित एक कौशलतार उपाय, कौशल माने आमे ताहाकू जेमिति गोटे काम कला बेले जमती गछटिए रोचु माने रांधुचु जते आम प्रथमे रांधु से रांधाटा हुए तो सेते भल न लगे बारंबार रांधिले सेटा अधिक कौशलपूर्ण हुए तेणु जो स्किलफुल मीन्स से उपायटा आमको लक्ष्य आड़ को नहीं जा एवं ए उपायटा जोटा बुद्ध धर्म रु आरंभ हैला ए फ्रिज ऑफ सोन टाकू आउ गोटे गभीर पाखक आणुचंती जे प्रत्येक धर्म सेमती गोटे उपाय एवं उपेय आउ उपायटा आमको लक्ष्य पाठक घेनी आसु धर्म आमको लक्ष्य ईश्वर बा जगत पाखक घिनी आसु परस्पर पाखक घिनी आसु किंतु अधिकांश धर्म रे कौन होची धर्मटा ताकू निजे ही तार लक्ष्य बोली कही निजको भगवान करके ता भितरे बांधे ताकू जो फॉर्मलाइजेशन होची एइटा ही व्यवस्थाटा आमको ब्रह्म बोली जना पड़ुची आ से विषय आमको सचेत हवाकू पड़िबो जेमिति जैन बुद्ध धर्म रे गोटे कथाटी कहा जायछि तो आमे आंगुली देखौछे चंद्र को किंतु हमर आंगुलीटा चंद्रमा नह एटा को आमे सब बेले बुझबाकू पड़िबो आउ एतिकी आउ तापर जो सुंदर संगलाप हैला हमर मारुफ भाई जहाँ को आमे सुनिथिले हमर स्वाध्याय सहचक्र रे किछि मास तळे एवं पाट्रिंग मध्यम रे मारुफ भारी महत्वपूर्ण कथा मान कहले हमर जने दार्शनिक अछंती मार्टिन हाइडिगर जे भी एमती किछि कथा कहिसंती तांको कथा कहले आउ सूफी धर्म रु इबन अरबी एवं एई सब कथा कहले एवं तार उत्तर रे पैट्रिक मध्य भारी गभीर कथा मान कहले तेणु आमे एतिकी क्षय को बुझिबा एबे so with this very quick translation so now I request Muri to kindly share his thoughts.
I'm happy to do so with one proviso that you probably noticed, Ananta, that I came in late. I was not able to get to the computer early enough. So I will tell you exactly the point at which I jumped in, so I don't know what Patrick said before, because Patrick in 5 seconds can say what, would require an hour to unravel. He was just commenting on the idea of religion as bringing us closer to, he said, or even one with God. And I thought I resonated with that. And of course, in particular, in the mystical enterprise, one's goal is to become filled with Godness. So one becomes one with God. And when one thinks, and he moved on to talk about a number of times, he mentioned, but it's not just a medley, different forms of faith, each takes its own direction toward the same end. And I was thinking because of a conference I was part of a couple of days back, and a distinction was made between the Abrahamic and the Dharmic faiths, that there was this difference, that difference. But then I thought, yes, but on the other hand, whether it is to become one in the sea of Brahman, of being, or to become one with the presence in a personified way, one still is engaged in the same ultimate goal, except that each path is its own path toward that goal. And that's something that one should always keep in mind. Christianism and Judaism look very different from each other, but there's a certain sense in which they share the same goals. Ibn Arabi and Derrida are, as Patrick pointed out, very profoundly different from each other, but ultimately the goal is the same. And part of the reason the goal is the same is that in the ideal, it's not about myself. It is about being, presence, God, Allah, whatever term that I use to refer to it. And I achieve my fullest possibility of reconnection to that when I come to recognize that it's not about myself, or put another way, it's not about myself. It's not about my ego. And the problematic in the history of religion, of course, is that it has all too often involved the ego of the practitioner or the ego of the leader. And in that sense, of course, religion has throughout its entire history never been disconnected from politics, which is about the ego. And within the within the religious traditions, the mystical traditions stand out as providing, at least in theory, a means of ridding oneself of that egocentric focus because of the realization that one's goal in achieving a kind of oneness with that other, however we refer to it, is ultimately to improve the world around us and each other, as opposed to simply to improve myself. It's not enlightenment for the sake of my enlightenment. It's enlightenment for the sake of how I can share my enlightenment with those around me. Which brings me to the discussion point that then Patrick brought up, the whole issue of language, and of course his reference to not confusing the finger with the moon struck me as just another way of saying not to confuse the revelation with my interpretation of the revelation. And of course, across the history of religion, that has been a consistent confusion. I determined that the form of faith that I possess is the most accurate, and the way I interpret, if my faith is based on some form of revelation. So I'm talking about the Gita, I'm talking about the Torah, I'm talking about the Quran, I'm talking about whatever text I presume to be derived from that source to which I wish to be connected or reconnected. I confuse my understanding of that text with the text itself, which is like confusing the finger with the moon. And what I mean by that is, fundamentally, the source of that text speaks a language that may not be mine, no matter how focused on a particular language I might be. So I'm looking at Hebrew by way of the Jewish tradition as God's preferred language. I'm looking at Arabic by way of the Muslim tradition of God's preferred language. I look at Sanskrit, and the very writing system itself is called Devanagari, right? City of the gods. So the assumption is that there's something even about the formation of the letters, to say nothing of the sounds, to say nothing of the concepts that have a divine origin. But the bottom line is that whether it is a personified God concept, or whether in aspects of the Dharmic traditions, it's not even that, we don't know how it is that God speaks. When Moses stands before this bush that burns and is not consumed in the Torah in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, and says to God, who shall I say, by the way, who are you? Who are you? Who shall I say sent me when I go back to Egypt and to the Israelites? And God gives this spectacular answer, I am will be that I am will be. I'm isness itself. You can't put me in a box by giving me a name that seeks to define me. You cannot grasp what I am. And then God has mercy. He says, well, just tell them it's the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That'll be good enough. But the real issue is it's isness. And I'm thinking, that's not all that far from where I am reaching in the Dharmic traditions. It's just a different vocabulary. But all those vocabularies are fingers pointing to the moon. And the problematic over human history and across our geography is when we confuse the moon with the finger. And then I think, aha, my interpretation, my understanding is tantamount to the revelation itself. And I don't stop and think, maybe that's my ego speaking and not God speaking.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ori. Actually, when you mentioned the I am that I am, but I don't know if you are aware of it, but Ramana Maharshi, one of the greatest Hindu sages of the 20th century, considered the answer, God's answer to Moses, to be the best possible characterization of the self, of the Atman. I am
yes,
that. It's
exactly.
It's the best possible. So your point is well taken. With respect to what you said earlier on, about differences between the Dharmic traditions and the Abrahamic traditions. I think something that might be fruitful considering in Xuan's works is the idea that the absolute, the ultimate, which of course is beyond our ken and is unfathomable in its essence, has, however, a multiplicity of aspects by definition, being infinite. And this multiplicity, this infinity, in fact, of aspects has to be, or is combined with the multiplicity of human standpoints on it. So you have this infinity of aspects, and you have this indefinite numbers of points of view. So if you multiply the facets of the absolute with the myriads of human points of view, you have the whole history of religions and spiritualities and why they are different and why they also converge toward the same center. So you can make sense of plurality and unity without having to sacrifice plurality, without having to sacrifice the integrity of the various traditions, and at the same time without letting go of the non-dual essence that is common to all.
Yes.
And I would, of course, totally agree with you with the idea that, you know, in mysticism particularly, you find this thrust of the ultimate and this approach to the unfathomable mystery that is the essence of it all. Xuan uses the metaphor or the symbol of the light and the colors. You know, the divine essence is like the light, which is refracted in countless ways with the colors and the various shades of colors. And of course, you can say that red is the light, but you cannot say that the light is red. You know, yes. So there is room for a certain exclusiveness, but at the same time, inclusiveness is the last word. So I see there is also a question, a very interesting question from Gianluigi Segale about on the chat. So I don't know if we should read it first aloud or
please.
Yeah, I would like to ask something about the assertion that metaphysics is an access to reality, but it is not reality, provided that I correctly understood this point in your contribution in particular. My question is related to the role and position of the individual subject in reality. Does the difference between metaphysics and reality mean that the individual subject is, due to his very mental constitution, able to fully grasp the essence of reality? The difference between metaphysics and reality, provided again that I correctly understood the point, lets me think at some points of Plato's Phaedrus, namely the great myth of gods and individual souls compared to chariots and charioteers, in which Plato outlines and underlines many times the substantial difference between God's capacity for knowledge, which is complete, and individual capacity for knowledge, which, in spite of all efforts, is not complete. In this sense, any form of human knowledge is for sure a way of access to the authentic reality, but is condemned to a certain degree of inadequacy as regards the appropriateness and the capacity of the human knowledge of completely grasp reality. I think one of the best treatment of this question is to be found in Arabic, particularly his notion of the gods of belief. That is the idea that we all have a certain representation of the infinite reality of God, which is, and our understanding and our image and our belief is necessarily delimited by our very limitations. So in that sense, we are totally unable, of course, to understand or to encompass reality with a big R, right? But from another point of view, and in Arabic makes also this point, perhaps not as directly as Advaita Vedanta, but from an altogether different point of view, he would also say, in Arabic would also say, and Xuan would say the same thing in different language, that God can know himself in us, in spite of our limitations. So that the ultimate knowledge for Ibn Arabi, the so-called Arif Billah, the one who knows by God by God. And Ibn Arabi in the Fusus al-Hikam writes that, in fact, there are three kinds of people. There's the ignorant one who thinks, who is not in God, whose knowledge is not from God, and who simply think that he will see God in the thereafter. It's interesting that Ibn Arabi considers that the one who will see God in the hereafter is actually ignorant. Why is he ignorant? Because he is not cognizant of the wahdat al-wujud, of the unicity of essence. The two other kinds are Arif, the one who is other than knower, or who is not a knower. And this one, he knows in God, from God, but by himself. So in that sense, he's limited, you see. That's why he's not truly a knower. And that's, I think, what your question relates to, the incapacity in the sense of the limitation. But Ibn Arabi adds, there's the third one, which is the real knower, who is the Arif Billah, and this one knows in God, from God, and by God. So you see, and this one only is the true knower. And we go back to Ori's point about the ego, because he doesn't know by himself. He knows by God, you see. So there is no ego there.
And of course, Socrates explains when he hears from the oracle that he's the wisest man in Greece, that he figures out that the reason he is the wisest is because he seems to be the only one who knows that he doesn't know anything. Yes. Everybody else he encounters, including the wise men, right, the sophists, think that they know things. And every time he interrogates them, it turns out they really don't know what they think they knew. They can't define things that they think they can define. He's the only one who knows that he doesn't know.
Yes, yes.
And he, right? And also to Gianluigi's point with regard to the Phaedrus, there is that other realm, which is the only realm of being. Our realm is not even considered a realm where being has any reality. It's a realm of becoming. It's in constant change, constant transformation. Nothing can be said. You cannot say of anything that it is, because it's not permanent. Nothing is. So that too is part of what you were just responding to, Patrick.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And very interesting conversation. And maybe at this juncture, if we invite Nicholas von Cusanus, and Cusanus' path of knowing, and what would be a possible dialogue between these three ways of knowing from Ibn Arabi and Cusanus, for example. And my hunch is that maybe the third way in Ibn Arabi has a resonance in Cusanus.
In Husserl?
No, in Cusanus, Nicholas von Cusanus.
Oh, Nicholas of Cusa. Nicholas of Cusa.
Yes.
Oh, Nicholas of Cusa. I see. Yes. Well, my Nicholas de Cusa is quite it's quite old. I remember reading the Docta Ignorancia, the Doctrine of Ignorance, when I was 20, a long time ago, 21 perhaps. So, but from what I remember from it, yes, there's the sense that knowledge is ignorance and ignorance is knowledge, of course, and that has to do, of course, with with what I suggested earlier, commenting upon Ibn Arabi. But is the paradox of a knowledge which is God's knowledge, which is not human knowledge, but which is rather God's knowledge within the human agency, so to speak, or the human reality. And in that sense, this knowledge always remains unknown by the human qua human. That's the paradox. Hence, perfect knowledge is a kind of human ignorance. We go back to Socrates. There is actually a passage from a letter from the spiritual writings of the Emir Abdel Qadir, the Algerian national hero, so to speak, of Algeria, who led the fight of the Algerians against the French colonialism in the 19th century. And as you probably know, the Emir Abdul Qadir was also a great Sufi in the lineage of Ibn Arabi, precisely. And in one of his mawaqif, in one of his spiritual writings, he relates that he was asked by a disciple of his why a specific question. He was asked a specific question about the Muslim prayer. Why is a certain type of prayer, the daytime prayer, is prayed silently, whereas the nighttime prayer is prayed aloud. And Abdul Qadir writes, I answered the question of my friend with what is half of knowledge. That is, I don't know. I answered my friend's question with half of knowledge, which is, I don't know. And then he goes on and says that later on, God gave him the grace of being able to answer the question. But he had first to say, I don't know. Then somehow he knew by the grace of God, you see, but not by his own ego or by his own self. It's a very, very beautiful, instructive story.
And I think with Kusa also, that the grace helps us in path of knowing. And so
grace, yeah.
Grace. Yes. So with this little threading, so let us move ahead. And now I request Nina to kindly speak. Nina, please.
Thank you so much for this great opportunity to feel all of you scientifically educated and philosophically equipped and religiously knowing a lot. I'm here because I really love and know Ananta for many, many years. And and I'm very happy just to share what I can tell in a very simple way, because I'm not educated. I refused to go on with I graduated the university for foreign languages, but I didn't want to become a scientist because I felt deep in my heart that my university is the universe, and that my school is life and the earth. And I'm very happy that by grace of God, I was given inside several divine experiences that do not belong to me because they spontaneously happened. And I would love to share the two key things as I have this precious opportunity. That I deeply feel within myself that we have two origins inside us, within us. One is the universal one, that is the absolute, and the other is the divine, because only humans, as I can feel, have the eternal soul. And of course, we have one and the same essence. This I know. And I know that there are lots of religions, but there is one faith. And religions are kind of organizations and politically connected and so on. But faith is one, and that is love. Today, I was going to put a very simple question to Patrick and to all. If we have very short time for only one word to express what is the key to the beyond, one word, what would we say?
I guess we would say love, probably.
Yeah.
But some would say love. I think perhaps most of us would say love, but I think others would say being or reality.
Yes.
And I think that's, and of course the two are not contradictory, obviously, because they are the same. But still, the distinction, of course, there's no distinction ultimately, but but there is a distinction in the sense in which I think the Hindu tradition precisely, and other traditions do also, perhaps not as clearly, distinguishes between the path of love and the path of knowledge. I deeply believe that, and it's not only a belief, I think it's an observation, that there are people who are mostly drawn by the language of, not only by the language of love, but by the reality of love. And there are others who are more directly drawn by considerations of reality and being. What is real? What is truly, you see, before even the question of love arises, you see. And of course, that's ultimately the same reality, but still in terms of sensibility, it's a different approach. The jnanin, the jnana, the path of knowledge versus bhakti. And Shuon, by the way, has a very beautiful sentence about that. He writes, there is bhakti without jnana, or there can be bhakti without jnana. That is, there can be path of love without path of knowledge, but there cannot be a path of knowledge without love, you see? Because as he states it, love is enough in and of itself. For some, knowledge is more central, but even if you are on the path of knowledge, you need love, because there's a sense in which you relate to the ultimate and you have to love the ultimate, you see. So one doesn't go without the other in that sense.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you to you. And in fact, if I may add something very briefly, since we mentioned Ramana Maharshi earlier, you know, when one thing, at least in the West, I don't know if all of you are familiar with Ramana Maharshi, I'm sure the Indians among you are, but if one think of Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century, one think of the pure path of knowledge. Who am I? You know, who am I? It's the question. It's knowledge, knowledge of reality, right? It's all about knowledge. There's no talk about love. And still, it is not known, it is not well known that Ramana Maharshi was deeply sensitive to the manifestations of the sacred. He would sometimes cry hearing scriptures being read, or he spontaneously composed praises, an erotic poem about Arunachala, right? In which he addresses Arunachala as a lover addresses his beloved. So you see, that's a typical example of Jnanin, a man of knowledge, who is also a bhakta, a lover.
Yes, I would love to add something about knowledge, if possible. Yes, really, there are people who are devoted to knowledge, so to speak, and the other is to sensitive things and love. But love is, what kind of love is the divine love? Accepts, embraces everything within us. But I would love to speak some words about knowledge. There is knowledge taken from outside, from the books, from everything, and philosophical concepts and so on. And there is the knowledge also written inside us, because every cell contains all the knowledge. And I have just read the book about the mother, you know, the spiritual collaborator of Sri Aurobindo, and she devoted her life to just opening this very knowledge from every cell of the body, even. And so if we pay attention, I hope, to our inner world, then we will awaken the inner truth that will be very proofable for us, at least for everybody. And then we can find some approvals in the books, in the teachings, and everywhere. But I feel that it is profoundly crucial and important now for people, because of this pantomime, to go deep inside and to really put together these knowledges outside and inside. And of course, only love will I feel that love is the divine precious gift for humans, and humans are citizens of this wonderful planet Earth. And so I'm very thankful for your precious thought. I cannot say that I understood every word, but some maybe 70%, but still but still I know that I found out that really the means is not the goal, and the goal is really one, and it is beyond all those different things that divide us, but we are really one. And when I visited India and some other lots of countries, I really felt all people as one, because they might seem to be different and to have different even religions, but in the essence, of course, we are one. And that's why I'm happy to feel all of you as parts of myself, and myself as part of you, because we are one body of entire humanity and entire universal and divine thing. Thank you so much. I won't take any time of you, but I am honored to feel all of you, to be with you, to be present. And who am I is the key question. Yes.
Yes.
Of course. This is the question. And I had some blissful opportunities to have some inner experiences of who am I. And this I know for sure because it was born from within and not because I was going to know. It simply happened. That's why I know that we are eternal, we are ever young, we are ever radiant, and we are created in the image of God. We are here to co-create God by our hands, feet, and hearts, and presence, and being, and even conversations. Thank you so much. And God bless all of us, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for these beautiful words. And more than words. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Words can only be bridges now. And now, as we are also embraced by time, so we have some very dear and very wise friends who have joined us. So I request that from this juncture, we can hear some of these friends, each one of them around 2 minutes, please. And I request the following friends kindly make a note of it. Malini, our dear sister, who is also a traveler with the deep journey with Shiva, and Malini, and after that, Dr. Saji Bhargis, our dear friend, then Susri Appa, Minati, and we have Dr. Thakur, and we have Manoranjan Puthal, who is a very interesting participant. She is doing very creative work with technology and social action. So each of these friends, let us listen to them from 1 to 2 minutes, and then I request Patrick to make note of their thoughts and hear his thoughts. So Malini, please. Hello, Malini. Okay, as Malini is taking some time, so now let us listen to Saji, please. Saji. Hello, Saji.
Yes. I'm here.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to listen to these great scholars. Professor Partik, thank you very much for such an enlightening session. I am a teacher of philosophy living in the remote part of this country, India. A friend of Professor Ananta. It's a blessing to be his friend. I'm particularly interested in just clarifying some thoughts which came up while listening to this beautiful conversation that took place even after your beautiful lecture. Referring back to Paul Tillich in his systematic theology, he writes, the reality, the structure, the meaning, and the aim of existence is the ultimate concern. These are his words, Paul Tillich. I consider it as metaphysics. I humbly treat it as metaphysics. What is ultimate concern, according to me, need not be universal. It may differ between individuals, primarily because the culture in which two individuals are brought up might differ. The language which one is growing up may differ from the other. My humble inquiry to Professor Patrick is culture and language a limitation in metaphysics, especially in knowing and realizing the ultimate concern? This is one humble inquiry. And another is about
I think he got disconnected.
Oh, unfortunately.
there is a sudden loss of connection here. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Suddenly everything went out here, so I was a little confused whether I could be heard. Yes. In the realm of intercultural, I'm beginning with this premise that Maya is of different forms. So in the realm of interreligious or intercultural, is it Maya which is causing the discreteness in the self? In its mathematic conception of the Atma, where there is momentariness, the discrete momentariness, rather discontinuity in the self. Is it the Maya which is refusing one to know that?
Okay, I think Saji,
Yes.
you kindly put very important questions. Thank you. So now let us move ahead. Malini, are you able to speak, please? Or we'll wait for you when you are. Now I request Swadhyaya, please. Swadhyaya.
Would Ananta, sorry to interrupt. Do you think it would be do you think it would be possible to answer briefly one question at a time, rather, or?
Sure, it's fine. Please kindly go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much for your question. I think they are very, very important and profound ones. For the first one, I think that goes back to what, in a sense, to what Nina was saying earlier. That is, what do we mean by knowledge? What do we mean by knowledge of the absolute? If we mean by knowledge of the absolute a human apprehension or a human understanding of the absolute, then obviously in that sense we are limited by linguistic and cultural and philosophical and religious determinations and forms that mediate our access to the absolute, right? But if we mean, and that's why there are so many books, if you wish, to put it symbolically. But if we mean by knowledge of the absolute, I think that's what Lina was hinting at earlier, something which is the unveiling of the universal essence that we are truly, then obviously knowledge in and of itself cannot be limited or determined by anything whatsoever, because this knowledge encompasses everything and is the essence of everything. And in fact, this knowledge can be accessed independently, in principle at least. It can be accessed independently from any book, any teacher, any religion, anything. I mean, in my school of thought, imperialism, we would sort of caution, though, that in 9,999 cases out of 10,000, it actually comes through the mediation of religions and spiritual paths. But obviously, the divine is free to manifest itself in any possible ways. So one cannot put boundaries and restrictions on the way in which the absolute may manifest itself. All right. So I don't know if it helps your question. And the second aspect, the second part of the question was about the question of the. I'm sorry, I lost the I lost the thread.
It is about language and culture. Is language and the culture a limitation?
Oh yes. So I already addressed.
It is the intercultural. It is the intercultural Maya and the.
Yes, Maya. Yes. Yes. So if I understood your question well, I think that in a sense, the representation of Atman, whether conceptual, linguistics, or any other kind of representation of Atman, is not Atman. Therefore, it is Maya. You see what I mean? So the Atman is Atman. Atman is the pure reality, the absolute reality that is the essence of all. So as soon as we think about it, as soon as we have notions of it or images of it, that is not it anymore. So in that sense, it is already Maya. So in representation, there is representation, whereas Atman is pure presentation of itself, right? So you can call this representation Maya, but you cannot call it Atman. Or if you call it Atman, it's not Atman anyway.
Thank you. Now we will meditate more with this. Now I see Professor D.P. Patnaik with us. I mentioned in the beginning. Professor Patnaik, I request you to kindly share your thought. Okay. Professor Patnaik, okay. As we are waiting for him.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yes.
You can hear?
Yes, please.
Yes, very well.
My only question is about Atman. Atman is not the ultimate. In the Upanishad, Aham Brahmosmi. I am Brahman. Atman is part of the Brahman. Therefore, I am what I am is one dimension. Aham Brahmosmi is another. So Brahma is the reality. Brahma is also beyond reality. Atman is Maya. When Brahman creates Atman. Atman gets involved in Maya. Therefore, Aham Brahmosmi is something which you must take into account. That's the only thing that I had to say at this point of time.
So, Professor Patnaik, if you kindly put your video, I think it would be a rare opportunity for us to see you also. Patrick has not met you.
I don't know how to.
Your colleague standing by you can help. Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. We got a glimpse of the Atman and the Paramatman.
Yes. Well, you know, it's your question is interesting because it raises the question of language once again. What do we mean by Atman? What do we mean by Brahman? And so forth. Of course, you know, I'm not an expert in Advaita Vedanta. I of course studied Advaita Vedanta in the sense that I'm a comparatist. But I think that it's always helpful, at least that's what I tell my students, to remember that Atman is, as you know better than I do, is a reflexive, right? So it's the self. But then the question is, what does self mean? Are we referring to the Jiva Atman, the living self, which is the particularized self, which has a history, a karma, a karmic constituents and limitations and whatnot, and a beginning and an end, in a sense, or are we referring to the Paramatman, the Supreme Atman, which is that you are, according to the Upanishad, right? Tatvam Asi, that you are. And that obviously is not the Jiva, it's the Paramatman, it's the Atman. So this Atman, this Paramatman, which is the self of all, is understood most often as being none other than the Brahman, the ultimate. The difference is that the Brahman is the ultimate apprehended, at least initially, as an object or as the supreme object, if you wish. Whereas the Paramatman is the same ultimate, but apprehended as the innermost self of all. When I try to explain this concept to Muslim students, since I teach in a predominantly Muslim country, I tell them, well, you know, for Muslim students, it's very, very unusual to speak about God as the self or God as the Paramatman. It's very foreign to their imagination, which is shaped by the Quran, where God is He or Him. An external object of worship, a divine object of worship. And so I tell them, well, you know, if you read in the Quran, if you look at the Arabic Quran, you will find in the Quran that sometimes God refers to himself as Huwa, which in Arabic means he. But at other times, there are some occurrences when actually the Quran says, I, Ana. So where God says I, like aham, right, in Sanskrit. So you could take the Arabic word Ana, I, as a name of God. Of course, in the Islamic tradition, it's not taken as such, but it could, because God calls himself I. God in the Quran says, I am that I am. So these are the two sides of the same reality. It's not as if there's Brahman and Atman. Atman and Brahman are the same reality, and that I am.
lovely, very illuminating. And thank you, Professor Patnaik, for being a source of this illumination, as always. And we must not forget that Professor Patnaik is young beyond 90.
Oh, that's very young.
Yes. And it is the grace of the divine. So we are very grateful to the divine. So then we have, let us listen to quickly, Susri Appa, and then we have also Madan Bhai and Minati and Dr. Kapoor. Susri Appa, are you coming?
Yeah, bye Sona Jauchiki. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Ananta Bhai, Professor Giri, and for inviting me to this. Thank you, Professor Patrick, and thank you for the brilliant presentation and all the very insightful discussions, questions by others, which I could be a part of. A lot of threads of thoughts and points to ponder and think further. Very quickly, I would just ask one question, and in my 2 minutes, 1 minute, I'll probably take one question, and the next minute I will spend in just something that resonated the most with me. The question is, how do we, I actually missed the first few minutes of the, because of the presentation, Dr. Patrick's presentation, because of my connectivity issue, as I wrote to you. I don't know if it is already covered. The question about consciousness and the layers of consciousness. So how does, how is it explained there? And can we look at, consciousness at its supreme layer as a, universal repository of knowledge and wisdom, which is what when we say that the intuitive knowledge of truth. So if which is accessed, through the intuitive knowledge of truth. This is the question that I would request a little more discussion on. Secondly, I also coming to, I heard Madam Meena saying, and Dr. Saji was also the search, the question of very existence, the very fundamental, the search and seeking, the very fundamental foundation of our living and life, of our existence, that who am I? And, essentially the, knowledge and the search, the answers to all questions begins from there, that I don't know. So, yeah, it is in that, spirit, I can probably, I'll probably, present few lines of one of my poetry, which is actually connecting to seeking poetry.
Say.
Yes. So, which is just a connecting thread between the seeking, life, search, poetry, and conscious and expand. The title of the poem is Odyssey, and it goes like this. Few lines I will, it's a long one, only few lines I will restrict it to. It searches for itself in acclaims, in splendors, in temples, mosques, churches, in scriptures, sculptures, touch, smell, vision, wonder, passes through dark tunnel, deep waters, jump into the receiving pit to reach the azure. The search never ends. Sometime it finds the footprints of life, somewhere it sees the scattered bits of death's anklet. It never stops anywhere, neither at fruition nor at emptiness. Perhaps this is what its existence is all about, an unending hide and seek between a spark of light and giggling darkness. Sitting still under the efflux of word, it keeps sculpting a figurine of the unseen. Who knows when someone would silently descend into them and smile in the mirror where truth sits translucent. There, the roads may end and the journey extends. So with this note, I thank you all once again, and over to Ananta Bhai and Dr. Patrick.
Thank you. So if it is okay, we can hear a few friends, Patrick, and then we'll listen to it very quickly. So now I request Minati, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. And thanks everyone for the enlightening discussion. Actually, I have very limited knowledge regarding these things, but I would like to add few lines to this, just what I thought actually. And I would like to Professor Patrick Laude to actually enlighten more about this. It is like, how do you take negativity as our mystical guide? So when we are dread and despise, the negative feeling we end up is either suppressing them or from running away from them. This actually deprives us for our self-growth and transformation. But as we believe, sometimes destruction lays the foundation for the transformation and for a new creation. So we should learn from the despair and euphoria, like think all negative emotions have their potentiality, what is missing from our life, right? So how we can mend the brokenness, how we can embrace it, our brokenness, and focus on the positivity. That one example can be given by Japanese art of kintsugi, where they mend that old cups, broken cups with the gold powder. And we just know when we see, we focus on the gold, not on the broken things. Like actually, when we acknowledge the power and accept our negativity, then the emotions of different possibilities actually opens up and it expands. So actually, when you are in rage and very angry, then we get the courage to fight for injustice. Right, anxiety and grief that lead us to live a different things. But my not question actually request to Professor Patrick Laude to enlighten us more how it can be done in a constructive way, like so that we can. So we need not have to run away from them. We can face it positively and do things constructively. Do you have time? Can I read few lines? Actually, it is related to these things.
Yes.
So today, the wind blows, bleak and chill. The sun is hid behind the mist. With the morning, it's dull and chill. Shall with his glad rain beams be kissed. And so, my dear, please cheer up. You will find each somber cloud is silver lined. And thank you for the opportunity. And thank you. Thanks everyone for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minati. You have surpassed yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You have brought a dimension. I am sure, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. No, I want to listen more about this. I mean, how can we do it at a time now we lose patience and sometimes how can we do it more constructively? Use negativity as our mystical guide.
So I
thank you.
Do it for a moment, dear Patrick. We'll just quickly listen to a few other friends as time is slowly embracing us. So now yes. I request Dr. Kapoor had put a chart on the question, chat box. Dr. Kapoor and Dr. Anu and Dr. Randhir, our host, and Dr. Tiwari. Very quickly we'll listen to them and then we'll come back to it. So Dr. Kapoor, please.
Hi, am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm a sociologist by training. I've been teaching sociology since last 22 years now. And my PhD was on faith and market culture, right? And I stayed in a village called Puducherry in Rajasthan within a temple for 3 years. But as a sociologist, we do more of society and religion interface rather than going for this question. But because I am on the way of sadhana, like before joining this session, I was doing my sadhana. So there is something which I have written out there in terms of I was listening to all of you. Today is my first attendance because I'm deeply engrossed in reading about this, talking about this to my student, fellow faculty. There is this celebration of plurality, and in this plurality, there is two things which is symbolic for me as well as significant. One is the path of love and another is the path of knowledge. Now, if you would look at the bhakti tradition, then it is not the path of knowledge, but it is the path of love, which is manifested in repetition of the rituals, which to many would not be making concrete sense, but repeated act of a particular piousness to the deity brings them to a sense of understanding that they are being connected. The path of knowledge continuously questions the self and the other, and these also questions the cultural limitations of this dialogue, as you said, the linguistic limitations of this dialogue. And it is in this dialogue that one tries to locate in terms of jnana, that which is comprehensible. Now, my specific question then is there a common thread of essence which can be as a singularity between the path of love and the path of knowledge? How, as a human, let's forget for a second that I've been academics. It is not merely a question looking for me in the book, but in the book of life, if I want to seek, then if you would say that it is my consciousness, then is my own consciousness about the Paramatman is in my comprehension within the limited training that I have in this body. Thank you for giving me the chance. Today was my first meeting. I'm blessed to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thakur. And I request you to kindly put your number and email to us. We are very happy to have your enriching presence. And then Anu, please, Dr. Anu Signa. Okay, if she is taking some time. And then Randhir, please. Randhir.
Yes. Thank you so much. The lecture is full of the echoes of Pharenical philosophy, I would say. And since one of the participants raised the question of love, and I found Fetch Chuan himself said very interesting point about love and its relation to truth. He says, the manifestation of truth is a mystery of love, just as conversely, the content of love is a misery of truth. And I also think a kind of separation between philosophy and the religion with the intervention of rigid science. So what happens, we have developed a kind of philosophy without religion, which leads to nihilism, sometimes atheism, and sometimes utopianism. We have also developed a religion without content of philosophy, which led us towards cultism, religious fundamentalism, and tribalism. But when we see the history, we see history tells us that the most effective philosophies and religious are those in which philosophical thought and religious speculation have merged shoulder to shoulder. And that is, I think, I find in Pharenical philosophy. And I have so many things to say, but briefly I want to say something about, because I'm a good reader, I would say, of critical school, Frankfurt School. And there I find a relationship between truth and goodness. Horkheimer's critique of Kant was over the assumption that the good brought happiness. Good, but many philosophers believe that good means happiness, which is not always clear-cut. Good too often a kind of non-cognitive term, and good does not necessarily lead to happiness. So in that sense, I find truth a kind of some vague. Truth as a truth-telling is different from truth as factual. One can be telling the truth in terms of their emotional state of mind or consciously while being completely erroneous about the fact. But many philosophers equate truth and rightness. That is, being right, they articulate the truth which is not appropriate. So the how Panachial philosophy sees this dilemma of means because our understanding of truth means truth is something which addresses the accuracy or adequacy of description about facts, but for example, to explain an extent or happening, why it emerged and how to formulate it, truth must address both teleological and goal directness. So how certain goals or aims determine or influence the event, or for that matter the causality or the cause or the reasons and intention that led to the effect and the consequences. So my question is like how Panachial school of thought answer these concerns of the understanding of the whole issue of the truth, what truth stands for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randhir. Thank you, as always. Now, I saw a message from Dr. Tanuja. She was also present last time. Dr. Tanuja, would you like to quickly share your thought? Dr. Tanuja, you can unmute yourself. Okay, you can also send a message to Dr. Tanuja Randhir. In the meantime, let us hear our friend Dr. Devendra Tiwari, who is also from the same university. And he's our kind nurturer. Dr. Tiwari, very quickly, he is going to give vote of thanks, but you will give vote of thanks after you speak, because all the time.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir, for giving me this opportunity. And I'm mesmerized to listen the dialogue since the very beginning. And it was all centered on mysticism, spiritualism, and different religion of the world were discussed by our eminent speakers. And at this juncture, I don't have any question, but I want to read my feelings. And for that, I have to quote Surdasa, a saint, is referred to Saint Surdasa of 16th century, devotional poet and saint who was blind by birth. His songs were written in Braj location of Uttar Pradesh, India, in praise of Lord Krishna. And one quatrain in Hindi, and of course I will explain it in English for my audience. And that is referred to love of God, as love has been of today's discussion. And so that quatrain is very important, and I seek permission to read it. Surdasa, while one of his prayer for Krishna says in Hindi, I quote, को सब कुछ दर्श बहिरे सुने मूक रंग चले सिर छत्र सूर बार बार से ही पाई. So,
Dr. Tiwari, I think you are not audible. Could you write the thing that you want to say? Please write in chat box because your voice is not coming clearly.
It's completely.
Yeah, I think we.
Am I audible now?
Not too much, but we heard you. So about Surdas, you are mentioning. You can.
Should I explain it in English?
Okay, if your voice
it will
is
take hardly 1 minute.
Okay, but we cannot hear you properly. But please try. Otherwise, you write in the chat, please.
Now I changed the location. It remains a signal problem, particularly time at my place. Is it a little bit improved?
Yes, a little bit improved.
So the theme is those blessed with the God.
Now, Dr. Tiwari, sorry, it is not audible. You please write in the chat, and our time is also embracing us. So you please write.
Okay. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm sorry because of network issue I failed to reveal my sentiments, but in chat box. Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Dr. Tiwari. Now we'll listen to Patrick and then we'll come.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, let me thank you all for this wonderful session and this wonderful exchange and so many profound and interesting questions. This is not going to be an answer, I'm going to follow up very, very briefly on the few points that were raised, and I apologize if I don't address them all. I remember I think it was Sushri, the first person who spoke, who mentioned the question of in a poetry, in a poem, the sense of infinite travel, infinite journey, and this kind of hide and seek between the complete revelation and the partial perception of reality, and that makes me think of what Ibn Arabi also has to say about what he calls the journey in God. But the journey there's not only a journey to God, and if we speak of journey to God, then we would of course think of God as the goal and the end of the journey. From a human point of view, because we return to our origin, so to speak. The end is like the origin. But there is also, says in Arabic, there is also the journey in God, because God is infinite. So from a human point of view, from our limited point of view, we always have to learn. And therefore we have to be receptive to the multiple ways in which God manifests himself in our lives. And that brings me to the second question, which was that of negativity, of Minati. Negativity, how to integrate negativity into the positive, so to speak. And I think a possible answer is to refer to Lord Shiva, because Lord Shiva is really the destroyer. So he brings negativity. He brings destruction. But the question is destruction of what? And destruction for what? So first, what is destroyed and in view of what? Well, what is destroyed? The negativity. I mean, if we can make use of any kind of negativity with a view to destroy that which is not real, or that which appears to be real, which is, as some of us said earlier, the ego, basically, the illusory ego. So negativity becomes positive if we use it as a way to destroy the negativity of the ego. But of course, this negation is in view of it's a no in view of a yes. The no is never an end. The no is always a means to a yes. Otherwise, it's nihilism, right? Only the devil says no, 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 no. The Islamic for testimony, for example, said no God but God. So it's the no is in the beginning, but not in the end, right? So, and then there was the question of philosophy and religion also, which was very interesting. That is, I totally agree that, you know, philosophy without religion ends up in a very sterile mental activity and hair splitting. And religion without wisdom, that is without love of wisdom, that is without philosophy, ends up all too often in narrowness and fanaticism. Not always, of course, but too often. And so there has to be a balance between, again, between knowledge and love, keeping in mind, of course, that ultimately the two are one. So that's one of the main points we have been sort of alluding to throughout our conversation, the fact that love and knowledge ultimately join, merge, so to speak, in the ocean of reality. Now, the question of reality precisely is a complex one, but the question of truth, rather, is a complex one, because truth can be understood, of course, on many different levels in many different domains. But I think a fruitful way of thinking of truth is, again, to go back to Advaita Vedanta and to remember that the Brahman, or the Nirguna Brahman, that is the non-qualified Brahman, the Supreme Brahman, is Sat, first of all. And Sat, Satya, it's being and truth. Truth is being. So the truth is being, first of all. And then there's truth, of course, as a kind of adequation to being. There are things which are adequate to being, but that's a kind of lower understanding of truth, a kind of alignment with being. But truth in a full sense is being, full being, true being, in that sense. And so perhaps we can sort of conclude on this note by saying that the seekers are seekers for being, for being, because being is, first of all, a miracle. It's something that we are given, right? It's a given in the sense of a miracle, something that could not be. We could not be. We are not necessary beings. I very well could not be. You could not be, but we are. So it's a kind of miracle. And in that sense, perhaps seeking means to prod into that miracle and to search for what this being means. What is this being that is our true self? So all religions, all forms of philosophy, in very diverse ways, seek for this being, seek for this true being, which is our true self. So thank you again for your presence and participation, and for this beautiful exchange.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, we also spent a very little time, half than a minute, in giving a thank, but we can use it creatively this time. I was mentioning about a very dear friend, a very devoted social activist, Manoranjan Putha, who is doing very interesting work. Manoranjan Bhai, would you please unmute yourself and speak one minute?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you, Anant Bhai, and namaskar.
Kindly unmute your video also. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Anant Bhai. Namaste, and to all of you. I am Manoranjan. I am a man of work. I am working in the remote areas of a state named Odisha. and I am functioning from it district headquarters, Bhubaneswar. And really, I am grateful that Anant Bhai invited me to these sessions on reality. And here, my question is, when we are working with youths of the remote villages, they have lot of concerns related to their livelihood, related to their living, and related to their future. For them, the reality is living. Then when 7 billion people in this globe are living a life with reality, and in another side, there is something about truths, then how to relate their reality in life with truths, what they are facing in their day-to-day life. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Maybe even if Patrick, you have said your last word, maybe you may like to speak one line about it.
Yes, it's a very important question, of course, because reality is not a luxury, right? Reality is not a luxury. But at the same time, there are situations in life where the search for reality may take a different way, because there is a pressure of immediate realities that may put the quest of reality on the back burner, so to speak. But I somehow don't think so, because, or I don't think it has to be so, because mankind has suffered throughout centuries and millennia, suffered in many, many different ways, physically, morally, as victims of injustice and whatnot. That's why Buddhism teaches that life is suffering. And still, suffering, these trials, these difficulties have not prevented human beings from seeking reality. Quite the contrary. It is this suffering, these difficulties, this challenge that have constrained us human beings to seek the real. And so I don't think that as difficult as it may be, a particular circumstance in life prevent us from seeking reality. Because seeking reality is part of being a human being in whatever condition we may be. So of course, there are many different ways in which we approach this reality from the point of view of our society, culture, ambience, and the trials which are part of our life, individual life and collective life. But still, there's only one reality, and this reality we cannot but confront at some point, because it is what we are. So I don't know if this is helpful, but that's what I would say in response to this important question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. So now maybe over to you, Randhir, for a very quick one-liner.
Thank you so much. And we are eagerly waiting for your next book, Surrendering of Self, Rama Maharsi's message. I think that will definitely answer some of the very concern of this debate also. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for bestowing your.
It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
so
Dr. Giri, also for your.
Thank you.